Your wife leaves today, whether you like it or not.
You're not forcing anyone out of my home.
She slammed the emergency eviction order against my chest before I even had the chance to reach for Hannah's hand. The paper crinkled under Marjorie Klein's nails, sharp, polished, and shaking just enough to betray how badly she wanted control. Behind her, the red strobes of incoming tactical vehicles flickered against the blue magnolia tree like some twisted warning shot. The board chair didn't blink. She acted like the street belonged to her. "You people should have complied the first time," she hissed, but she didn't expect what came out of my mouth next. "That radio signature belongs to a SWAT team," I said quietly, "and I helped design half their comm routing software." Her eyes twitched, a tiny crack. The first one of the night. Before I go any further, if you've ever felt that fire in your chest when someone tried to bulldoze your family, stay right here and hit the subscribe button now. I took a slow breath, grounding myself as the sirens cut closer. "You have no idea what you just triggered," I told her, not as a threat, but as fact. The tyrant in heels straightened as if she could outrun reality by standing taller. "I know exactly what I triggered," she snapped. She didn't, not yet. "My name's Grant Mercer," I said, keeping my voice controlled even as my pulse hammered. "I spent years consulting for tactical tech contractors. I recognize misuse of emergency authority when I see it." Her jaw clenched. Her grip tightened on the clipboard she carried like a scepter. No, the clipboard queen carried it like a weapon. But none of that mattered when I turned toward Hannah. She stood beside the blue magnolia tree, our tree, fingers trembling where they pressed against the bark she always touched when her anxiety spiked. The last time she was cornered like this, years ago, she didn't speak for 3 days. I'd sworn I'd never let anyone push her into that darkness again. And here we were, because of one woman's obsession with power. "Your wife obstructed a compliance inspection," Marjorie said, voice rising as neighbors peered out from porches. "That is grounds for immediate removal under Silverwood Ridge Code." "She was watering that tree," I said. "Her tree!" The enforcer in crimson strutted up then, heels clacking across the driveway, whispering something into the board chair's ear. Marjorie nodded sharply, as if the whisper had fueled her rage. I stepped between them and Hannah. My hand brushed back toward her, searching for hers. She squeezed weakly, confirmation that she was still here, still fighting panic, still terrified. "Where are you watching from?" I asked quietly, turning to the unseen viewers sharing this moment with me. "Because what you're about to witness, you won't believe how far an HOA president will go to make fear look like authority." The officer of rules, a man who rarely spoke, took a cautious step toward Marjorie. "Are you sure we should—" "Stay out of it," she snapped, pushing past him. The tyrant in heels lifted her chin. "The eviction will proceed." Eviction. Tonight. With a tactical team. I heard the convoy's engines before I saw them. A deep growl rolling across the pavement. Tactical boots hitting asphalt in unison. A command voice punching through the night air. And then, something froze inside me. The lead operator stepped into the streetlight, visor raised. I recognized the stance first, then the shoulders, then the scar. Commander Lucas Hayes, Hannah's brother. He had no idea the threat he was sent to remove was his own sister. I didn't move, couldn't. My mind spun as Marjorie took a victorious step forward, oblivious to what she'd unleashed. "This is Silverwood Ridge," she announced. "Remove the trespasser." Hannah gasped. Lucas's head whipped toward her voice. Everything shattered, and for the first time since this nightmare started, the board chair finally lost her grip on the narrative. Lucas froze under the streetlight, the shock hitting him like a physical blow. I watched the commander's breath catch as recognition carved across his face. Hannah whispered his name, barely audible, but it was enough to punch straight through the tactical posture he carried like armor. The entire SWAT line wavered behind him, operators shifting as if they could feel the shift in gravity too. But Marjorie Klein didn't notice, or didn't care. The board chair marched forward with the confidence of someone who believed proximity to a badge gave her the right to rewrite reality. "Commander Hayes!" she barked, waving the eviction order like a royal decree. "Your team needs to proceed. The trespasser is refusing removal." Trespasser. Hannah! His own sister. The clipboard queen hovered behind her, clutching a stack of compliance forms as if they'd shield her from the truth unraveling around us. Lucas didn't respond. He just stared at Hannah, eyes widening, jaw slackening, the entire hard exterior of a SWAT leader fracturing in real time. Hannah stepped closer, shaking, her hand lifting tentatively. "It's me," she whispered. The enforcer in crimson shot a quick glance at Marjorie. "Ma'am, maybe we should verify—" The tyrant in heels spun on her. "Follow the protocol I gave you." Protocol. That word coming from her mouth tasted like poison. "Commander," I said steadily, stepping forward just enough to draw Lucas's focus. "This was filed as a high-risk threat, but my wife never refused a lawful order. She never posed danger. She was watering a tree." Marjorie scoffed. "And you expect anyone to believe that? Your wife ignored an inspection. That alone classifies her as non-compliant." I turned sharply toward her. Non-compliance doesn't justify a tactical eviction. The officer of rules cleared his throat, timid but audible. Evictions aren't supposed to involve armed units. She cut him off instantly. "I escalated because they escalated." "We never escalated," I said. "You did." The board chair's lips trembled, not with fear, but fury. That same fury she'd weaponized against anyone who dared question her authority. Behind her, the clipboard queen flinched every time Marjorie raised her voice, shrinking into herself like she'd been conditioned to expect verbal shrapnel. Lucas finally stepped forward, voice tight. "Why was this issued as a threat call?" Marjorie clicked her tongue. "Because your sister—" She caught herself too late. The entire neighborhood gasped. "That's right," a woman on her porch called out. "She's his sister." "I didn't know," the clipboard queen blurted out. "She didn't tell me. She just said push it through." Marjorie's head whipped toward her. "Quiet." But something in the clipboard queen snapped. A tiny, fragile rebellion. "You said they were hostile. You said he attacked you last month." "I did not say—" Marjorie choked on the lie mid-sentence, realizing how many ears were listening. I stepped in front of Hannah, feeling her grip tighten on the fabric of my shirt. "You've been building a pattern, landscaping violations, refusal to attend inspection, improper soil additives. Every week you're inventing new rules. That magnolia is a hazard," the board chair snapped. "That magnolia," I said sharply, "is the only thing that calms her panic attacks." Lucas's eyes narrowed, flicking between us and the tyrant in heels. "You reported her as a threat." "She is!" Marjorie shouted, voice cracking. "Non-compliance is a threat to community order." The enforcer in crimson whispered, "Oh God." Neighbors stepped closer, forming a loose semicircle, arms folded, phones recording. For the first time, Marjorie seemed to realize she wasn't speaking into a vacuum. She was speaking into a crowd, but she pushed through it, chest rising and falling with rage. "Proceed with removal," she ordered Lucas. He didn't move. Instead, he lowered his weapon, eyes never leaving his sister. "No." The single word detonated through Silverwood Ridge. Marjorie lunged toward him. "You don't get to refuse me." The officer of rules pulled her back instinctively, startled by her desperation. Lucas raised his voice, steady and commanding now. "Ma'am, step back." For the first time, Marjorie Klein hesitated, and the power she'd clung to for years slipped, just enough for everyone to see the crack widening. Lucas's refusal hit Marjorie Klein harder than any physical shove could have. The board chair stood frozen in the middle of the cul-de-sac, her authority unraveling inch by inch, while neighbors whispered and phones recorded. The enforcer in crimson hovered nearby, pretending to check her clipboard, but clearly watching Marjorie like she might combust. The officer of rules kept wringing his hands as if he wanted to melt into the asphalt. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. Because one person was still missing from this mess, one person whose silence felt louder than everyone else's outrage. Ethan Rowe, the HOA security liaison. He should have been right beside Marjorie. Instead, he was nowhere in sight. That alone told me everything. I guided Hannah back toward the house, keeping my arm around her trembling shoulders. The blue magnolia tree rustled above us, its petals fluttering down like it sensed the storm simmering beneath the surface. Lucas followed, still processing everything he'd just learned. His breathing was uneven, his hands shook. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear I didn't know she lived here." "I believe you," I said. but we need to talk inside. Before we reached the porch, the clipboard queen rushed up behind us, voice shaking. She's going to blame me, she said. She already yelled at me for handing the wrong form. She said I sabotaged her authority. I looked at her. She wasn't innocent, but she was scared. The kind of scared that made you follow orders you shouldn't. She's losing control, I told her softly. But you don't have to go down with her. Behind us, the tyrant in heels screamed something unintelligible at the officer of rules, who flinched like a scolded child. I used that distraction to slip away toward the HOA security booth. If Marjorie was the tyrant, the booth was her throne room, and Ethan Rowe was the one who enabled most of her directives. The booth windows glowed faintly as I approached, the hum of monitors vibrating through the glass. I pushed the door open. Ethan shot to his feet so fast his chair slammed into the wall. His face was pale, ashen really, and sweat clung to his hairline. His fingers trembled against the desk, as if he'd been gripping something too tightly for too long. "Grant," he croaked. "Why weren't you out there?" I asked, closing the door behind me. His throat bobbed. I saw what happened." "That's not what I asked?" His gaze darted to the monitors. Every camera in Silverwood Ridge displayed across a grid of glowing screens. On one feed, Marjorie was still gesturing wildly at Lucas. On another, the enforcer in crimson paced in frantic circles. Neighbors gathered in clumps on sidewalks, the board's little kingdom crumbling in real time. Ethan wiped his palms on his slacks. "She told me to stay here, said I complicate her narrative." Narrative. There it was again. I stepped closer. "What did she make you submit, Ethan?" His eyes filled instantly with panic. I shouldn't say." "Look at her," I said, pointing to the live feed of the tyrant in heels screaming into the night. "Do you really think she'll protect you when this collapses?" His breath hitched. I lowered my voice. "You know something was wrong with the call she made. That's why you're hiding." He flinched like I'd struck him. His fingers twitched toward a folder on the desk, then stopped. His jaw clenched. "I didn't want to do it," he whispered. "She said it was protocol. She said if I questioned her, she'd have me removed from the board entirely." "So you followed her?" I asked. His eyes brimmed. "She said your wife refused inspection. She said your wife barricaded herself inside. She said she'd seen threatening gestures. She said she needed backup for her safety." "And you believe that?" He shook his head desperately. "No, I knew she was exaggerating. But she makes you feel like you have no choice." I watched him, shoulders hunched, chest tight, hands trembling like he was trying to hold himself together. This wasn't a man protecting Marjorie. This was a man breaking under her. "Ethan, what did she submit?" I asked again, softer this time. His lips parted. He inhaled, shaky, and finally, "She made me tag your address as a level 3 high-risk threat." The words spilled out like confession and collapse, and with them, the truth cracked wide open. Ethan's confession echoed in my skull long after the words left his lips. Level 3 high-risk threat. That was the classification used for armed suspects, violent offenders, barricaded individuals. Not for a woman watering her blue magnolia tree. Not for someone who could barely raise her voice without trembling. I didn't yell at him. Couldn't. If anything, seeing him collapse under the weight of his own guilt told me exactly what kind of grip Marjorie Klein had over this neighborhood. The board chair didn't just enforce rules. She infected people with fear until obedience felt like survival. I left the booth without another word, stepping into the cooler air of the community garden trail. The path was lined with trimmed hedges that Marjorie claimed she personally approved for uniformity, though everyone knew the enforcer in crimson had spent entire afternoons measuring them with a tape measure while she watched like a hawk. Tonight, those hedges cast long shadows beneath the dim lantern lights, shadows that seemed to whisper warnings of everything the HOA had become under one tyrant in heels. I walked the path to steady myself, to think, to breathe. But peace wasn't what found me. Grant. Her voice. The one person I didn't want to see right now. Marjorie stepped out from behind a signpost, arms crossed, lips pulled into a smirk so brittle it could shatter with a single question. The clipboard queen and the officer of rules trailed behind her like anxious dogs afraid of being kicked. "You shouldn't be wandering after dark," she said, tone dripping condescension. It's against the safety guidelines. My jaw tightened. You made my home a target. She lifted her chin. No, your wife made herself a target by... Stop, I snapped, stepping closer. Don't say her name like she's some criminal you get to control. The enforcer in crimson lingered on the edge of the path, arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes darted between us, tracking every sharp breath, every twitch of Marjorie's jaw. She wasn't confident anymore. She was rattled. Good. You escalated a landscaping notice into a tactical raid, I continued. You abused emergency channels to force power you never had. Her brows arched. I followed protocol. I almost laughed. Protocol? Ethan just told me you ordered him to tag our address as a level 3 high-risk threat. A flicker, a flinch, gone in a heartbeat, but I saw it. The clipboard queen gasped softly. The officer of rules swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing so visibly he looked ill. Marjorie leaned forward. Ethan is unstable. He misunderstood. He exaggerates. Or you do, I countered. Her mask cracked again. Not enough for a full reveal, but enough to show the fear creeping under her skin. She glanced toward the trail exit where distant porch lights flickered. She knew people were watching. Your wife ignored repeated inspection notices, she said, voice loud enough to carry. She refused access to a common area evaluation. That's a lie, I said. Is it? She snapped. Or are you using her anxiety to fabricate innocence? That one hit harder than anything she'd said before, because it wasn't just an accusation. It was cruelty. The enforcer in crimson whispered, Marjorie, maybe don't. But the tyrant in heels cut her off. He needs to hear the truth. I stepped closer. Here's mine. Hannah hasn't violated a single rule. You've been fabricating problems for months. Landscape discrepancies, unapproved soil, failure to attend meetings, anything you could twist. Her voice sharpened. You think you can expose me? You think you can embarrass me after what happened tonight? You embarrassed yourself, I said. A tremor rippled through her posture. I pressed on. You're losing control. You're losing the neighborhood. And you're losing the narrative. The clipboard queen whispered, barely audible. She's spiraling. Marjorie whirled on her. I am not spiraling. Her voice echoed down the garden trail, sharp enough to send a flock of birds scattering from the nearby trees. Then she turned back to me, breathing hard. You have no idea what you've started. I don't need to start anything, I said. You already did. She stepped back, fear finally flashing behind her eyes. Because, for the first time, she realized she wasn't the most powerful person in Silverwood Ridge anymore. The moment Marjorie Klein stormed off the garden trail, her heels snapping. Like warning shots against the pavement, I knew something was shifting, cracking inside the empire she'd built. But I didn't know how deep that crack went. Not yet. I walked back toward my street, needing answers more than sleep. That's when I noticed the glow from the Silverwood Ridge Emergency Operations Kiosk, an automated station the HOA installed 2 years ago to streamline neighborhood safety. Everyone complained about the cost, but the board chair insisted it was essential. Until now, I'd never even touched the system. Tonight, it was unlocked. The screen flickered, displaying a rotating dashboard of neighborhood alerts, response logs, and internal routing tags. Someone had left it active, maybe by accident, maybe on purpose. But after what Ethan had confessed, I wasn't letting the opportunity pass. I approached slowly, listening for footsteps behind me. Nothing, just the hum of the streetlights and the rustle of wind through the dogwood trees Hannah loved so much. I tapped the screen, and the interface expanded into advanced viewing options, the kind that were supposed to be board-only. That's when I saw it. A red-coded entry labeled High-Risk Eviction Protocol, Authorization M. Klein. My throat tightened. She had written it herself. And the timestamp? 2 hours before SWAT arrived at my home. The enforcer in crimson had been telling the truth without speaking. Marjorie had escalated everything preemptively. Days before the supposed violation she blamed my wife for. And below the authorization was a note that made my stomach drop. Utilize sibling connection for expedited tactical compliance. Sibling connection. She had leveraged the relationship between my wife and her brother, the commander of the regional tactical unit, not to help us, but to weaponize the system against us. I scrolled further down until my finger froze on another entry. Secondary trigger, failure to comply with inspection notice. Initiate level 3 classification. No details, no signatures, no legitimate cause, just her. The clipboard queen had stood by her side while this was created. The officer of rules had probably read it silently and followed instructions, but the tyrant in heels had authored the threat herself. A shadow moved behind me. I turned fast. It wasn't Marjorie. It was the enforcer in crimson. She was hugging herself, gaze trembling toward the kiosk screen. She looked as if she'd been debating approaching me for hours. "You shouldn't be looking at that," she whispered. "You left it open?" I asked. Her lips parted, surprise flickering, but she didn't answer. "What does this mean?" I demanded, pointing at the authorization. Her breathing hitched. She said it was the only way to keep order in the neighborhood. She said you were escalating, that your wife was manipulating residents, that the commander would never question an emergency tag. I looked at her, really looked. The guilt was bleeding through her posture, shoulders curled inward, eyes shiny, knees slightly weak. She wasn't just scared, she was ashamed. "You didn't believe her," I said. She blinked rapidly, tears not falling but threatening. "I didn't know what to believe. She's always been powerful, convincing. You don't argue with the board chair." "But you knew this was wrong," I said quietly. She nodded once. "I did, and I'm sorry." The apology was barely audible, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that the officer of rules wasn't the only one trapped in Marjorie's spiral of control. The entire HOA board had been manipulated, intimidated, and pushed into compliance. "Why are you here?" I asked her. She swallowed. "Because what she's planning next, it won't stop with tonight." My heart pounded. "What is she planning?" She shook her head. "Not here, cameras." That word changed everything. The kiosk, the streetlights, the signs, the walkways. She had cameras everywhere, and suddenly I understood. The discovery Ethan gave me wasn't the full picture. This was. This system was her power source, her cover, her weapon. And tonight, I had finally cracked it open. The enforcer in crimson's warning echoed through my skull long after we slipped away from the glowing kiosk. Cameras, everywhere. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was infrastructure. A system that Marjorie Klein had spun like a spider web across Silverwood Ridge, each thread designed to tug whenever she wanted someone to fall into line. She led me through the quiet back paths behind the clubhouse, past the trimmed hedges and the manicured walking trail. We didn't speak until we reached the abandoned tennis courts, condemned years ago after a drainage collapse, left untouched because the board chair claimed budget constraints prevented repair. Now I understood the real reason. No cameras here. She checked the gate twice before stepping inside. Her hands shook as she hugged her elbows. "She can't hear us here," she whispered, like saying the words too loud would bring the tyrant in heels swooping down. "What is she planning?" I asked. The enforcer swallowed hard. "She's escalating the classification on your house." "My house?" I repeated, fighting the urge to pace. She already pushed an emergency eviction that wasn't real. "She's not done," she breathed. "Marjorie Klein signed an internal memo calling your family a persistent destabilizing threat. She wants the board to vote on a full removal order this week." My chest tightened. "She can't legally do that." "She doesn't care," the enforcer said. "The officer of rules won't challenge her. The clipboard queen follows orders. And the rest of the board, they're scared of her. She controls the cameras, the fines, the inspection tags. No one crosses her." I stared at the cracked surface beneath my feet, the weeds pushing through. This forgotten court felt like the last honest corner of the community, and even that was hanging by a thread. "What else?" I asked. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "She's going after your wife next." The words landed like a punch. "How?" I forced out. "Another violation." Her voice trembled. "She filed a draft notice claiming your wife was obstructing neighborhood order and colluding to undermine HOA processes. It's all made up, but she's determined." I felt my jaw clench so tight it hurt. "Why is she obsessed with us?" The enforcer shook her head slowly. "You're the only one she can't control, the only one who pushes back. It scares her." "Good," Let her be scared. What about the SWAT call? I asked. Did she really contact them directly? She looked away. She used the emergency infrastructure to send an escalation request. The commander received it like any high-risk domestic call. My wife's own brother, I whispered. He didn't know? No, she said. She counted on that. My hands curled into fists. Enough was enough. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a power struggle. This was targeted harassment, weaponized policy. And I could finally see the edges of her system. The cameras, the infrastructure, the fake protocols, the falsified memos. The legal trap she thought she'd hidden. She wasn't just violating rules, she was manufacturing them. The abandoned court felt too small to hold the weight of what she'd done. I'm going to stop her, I said quietly. The enforcer in Crimson's eyes widened. How? I took a steady breath, feeling the shift inside me, resolve sharpening like steel. I've spent 10 years designing secure infrastructure for municipal systems. I know how emergency networks are supposed to work, and what happens when someone abuses them. Her breath caught. You're going after the system? I'm going after the truth, I corrected. And when I expose what she's done to the city, when they see she faked an emergency tag to weaponize SWAT, she'll lose everything she built. The enforcer looked terrified, but relieved. She'll know you're onto her. She already suspects, I said. But now I'm done reacting. It's my turn to move. For the first time since the raid, the fear inside me hardened into determination. Marjorie Klein started this. I would finish it. I didn't sleep the night after the abandoned court meeting. Every word the enforcer in Crimson whispered replayed in my head. Her warning about a full removal order, the falsified memo, the next violation aimed straight at my wife. And underneath it all sat the one truth I couldn't shake. Marjorie Klein had built herself a kingdom of surveillance and fear, and everyone else in Silverwood Ridge bowed to it. Everyone except one. By sunrise, I got her text. Meet me at the Overlook, alone. The utility substation Overlook sat on a ridge behind the neighborhood, a place kids once used to watch fireworks before the board chair restricted access for community safety. Naturally, she installed 3 cameras there, 2 of which I knew how to blind temporarily. When I reached the gate, the clipboard queen was already waiting. She kept her hood up, hands jammed deep into her pockets, pacing in a nervous loop. She wasn't the commanding figure she pretended to be at board meetings. Here, away from the officer of rules and the tyrant in heels, she looked like someone wrestling with herself. You came, she whispered, almost surprised. You asked, I said. What's going on? She scanned the hilltop twice before stepping closer. I have something for you, something that'll change everything. Her voice trembled. She wasn't exaggerating. What is it? I asked, watching her fight her own fear. It's about the SWAT call, she said, about how the raid actually got triggered. My pulse jumped. You already told me she used the emergency system. No. Her eyes locked on mine. I mean, how she got access. That stopped me cold. The enforcer took a slow breath, like she was peeling back a secret she'd buried deeper than she ever intended. She didn't just misuse the system, she rerouted it. She created a fake authority escalation pathway inside the HOA's maintenance portal. It mimics a municipal override code. I stared at her, stunned. That's a felony. I know. She rubbed her hands together, shivering despite the warm morning. I knew she was going too far, but I didn't know how far until I saw the back-end logs. The clipboard queen looked like she might crumble right there. Her guilt poured through every shaky breath. She forced you to help? I asked quietly. She threatened my housing contract, she said. Said she'd call my employer. I don't have family here. You know that. I didn't have anyone to stand up for me. Her voice cracked. I didn't mean for your wife to be caught in it. A heavy silence settled between us. This was the confession Part 7 demanded. This was the turning point. She pulled out a small flash drive. I copied everything before she locked it behind her private credentials. I shouldn't have it. But it proves she created the emergency pathway, not the city. It proves she weaponized it. I reached for it slowly. You're risking everything giving me this. She already suspects I'm wavering, she said. The tyrant in heels watches me closer than anyone else. She knows I'm the only one who ever questions her. And you're ready to stand against her? I asked. She blinked hard, tears threatening. I don't want to live in fear anymore. And after what she did to your wife, I can't keep pretending she's just strict. She's dangerous. I slipped the drive into my jacket pocket. This is enough to trigger a formal municipal investigation. That's why I'm scared, she whispered. She won't go down quietly. And when she realizes you have the logs, she'll try to turn the whole neighborhood against you. I met her eyes, steady and unshaken. She's been trying since day one. For the first time, the clipboard queen let out a breath she'd been holding for months. Relief, fear, and a flicker of hope all tangled in her expression. What will you do now? She asked. I looked toward the quiet rooftops below, the homes she ruled through intimidation, the families too afraid to challenge her. I'm going to expose her system, I said. And when the city sees the truth, Marjorie Klein's empire collapses. The wind cut across the ridge, carrying the weight of what was coming, and for the first time, I wasn't facing it alone. I didn't go home that morning. I retreated straight into my home office, the one place Marjorie Klein couldn't reach with her surveillance grid. Not because she didn't want to, but because I built this room myself. Shielded walls, encrypted network, independent power node. The kind of setup you create when you've spent a career designing secure infrastructure for municipalities, and you know exactly how often systems are abused. My wife sat curled on the couch across from me, still shaken from the raid, her brother's team swarming her home because of a lie manufactured by the officer of rules. Seeing her like that, the quiet tremors in her hands, the way she kept glancing toward the windows as if the tyrant in heels might materialize again, hardened every part of me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about restoring her sense of safety. I laid the flash drive on the desk. The enforcer and Crimson's confession replayed in my mind. The spoofed authority pathway, the fabricated emergency codes, the back-end logs that proved the board chair had manipulated the system. This was the crack in her empire. Now I needed to widen it until the entire facade collapsed. My screen lit up with the HOA network map I'd been quietly studying for weeks. Not to hack it, no. That wasn't the plan. The plan was to expose it. Every node, every violation, every misuse of emergency infrastructure that Marjorie Klein buried behind her polished newsletters and fabricated fines. But this had to be airtight, ironclad. Something she couldn't spin, couldn't erase, couldn't weaponize back at me. My phone buzzed, a text from the clipboard queen. She knows you were at the Overlook. Be careful. Of course she knew. The tyrant in heels always sensed when control slipped from her hands. Her entire system was built on one principle. No one moves without her knowing. And when someone does, she hunts. I steadied my breathing and kept working. Step 1. Validate the logs. Every system in Silverwood Ridge used time-stamped keys. If the board chair spoofed an authority code, she had to use a non-standard pattern. I aligned the sequences, compared them to actual municipal protocols I'd developed years back, and my stomach tightened. There it was, clear as day, an unauthorized protocol signature, hers. Step 2, trace the pathway. She didn't just trigger the raid, she built the route for it, splicing her HOA access into a federal emergency escalation channel. A move that required not only audacity, but an absolute belief she would never be questioned. Classic clipboard, queen arrogance. My wife watched me, pulling her knees to her chest. Are you sure this is safe? No, I answered honestly. But it's necessary. She nodded, swallowing hard. Whatever she's built, tear it down. Her faith steadied me more than any training I'd ever had. Step 3, build the report. Not a complaint, not a neighborhood grievance, a formal digital packet designed for 3 destinations: the City Oversight Committee, the Emergency Communications Office, and Internal SWAT Review. All of them would see it simultaneously. That part mattered. If only one department got the truth, the officer of rules would have time to spin it. If all 3 received it at once, her empire cracked before she could react. I formatted the evidence, hash-locked the files, and prepared the transmission architecture. My cursor hovered over the final compile command when my network monitor pinged red. Unauthorized handshake attempt. unfamiliar MAC address. Trying to access my external node, I froze. She was trying to breach my network. Marjorie Klein was done playing subtle. I activated a defensive isolate, severing the external feed. The intrusion disappeared as quickly as it arrived, but she'd sent a message. She knew I was moving against her. And she wasn't waiting. My wife stood up, fear turning into something sharper. "She's coming, isn't she?" "Oh, she's coming," I said. But this time, she's not the only one prepared. I hit compile. The report finalized, encrypted, time-stamped, irrefutable. Tomorrow, the city would know exactly who she was. And by the time the tyrant in heels realized she'd lost control, it would already be too late. I didn't send the report immediately. Timing mattered just as much as truth. If I hit transmit too early, the clipboard queen might intercept the fallout, shift blame, or bury the scandal under a dozen fabricated violations. I needed eyes on her. I needed witnesses. And I needed a setting where she had no control, someplace outside her camera grid. The community garden pavilion was perfect. A small wooden structure tucked behind the raised beds, technically HOA property, yet long neglected because the tyrant in heels considered gardening a low-value community activity. Translation: no cameras, no patrol tags, no oversight. The one place her empire hadn't choked with surveillance. I arrived. Early laptop and encrypted drive tucked under my arm. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the planter rows. Volunteers watered tomatoes and herbs, whispering the way people do when fear has become routine. They all felt her presence even when she wasn't there. I set up on the pavilion table, checking my flank every few minutes. If Marjorie Klein tried another network intrusion, I'd catch it. If she tried to ambush me with the officer of rules, I'd see her before she saw me. When the enforcer in crimson arrived, she didn't step into the pavilion. She scanned the perimeter first, shoulders stiff, eyes darting. Her anxiety had become a physical thing. "She's furious," she said. "The board chair tore apart her office this morning, files everywhere, screaming that someone in my circle is leaking." My jaw clenched. "She knows I have the logs." "She's not sure yet," the enforcer whispered, "but she's circling the idea. And she's preparing a narrative to blame you before you strike." I opened my laptop. "She won't get the chance." The enforcer hesitated, then slid into the seat across from me. "Tell me what you're doing." "I'm setting the trap," I said. A digital paper trail showing exactly where her misuse started, how she accessed the emergency infrastructure, and who she impersonated when she triggered the SWAT escalation. She swallowed. "You can prove she forged those codes?" "Yes." And saying it aloud gave me a surge of focus strong enough to cut through my exhaustion. The enforcer pressed her palms to the table. "She's already drafting a neighborhood-wide alert, claiming your wife is a continuing domestic threat. She'll send it tonight if she feels cornered." My breath went icy. "She's doubling down." "She always does," the enforcer said. "The clipboard queen is terrified. She said Marjorie won't stop until she destroys you to protect her reputation." I leaned back, letting the anger settle into something cold and sharpened. "Then we move first." I set the laptop between us, showing the mapped-out evidence packet. 3 synchronized transmissions, city oversight, emergency communications office, and SWAT internal review, all at once. No delay, no suppression window. The enforcer's eyes widened. "You're detonating her entire system." "That's the plan." Before she could reply, a sharp sound cracked against the far fence. Something between a thud and a metallic snap. We both froze. Footsteps, deliberate, close. The officer of rules stepped into view first, clutching a leather-bound binder like a weapon. Her eyes locked onto us, furious, accusatory, trembling. And then behind her, moving with that unmistakable predatory confidence, came the tyrant in heels herself, Marjorie Klein. Her expression was a perfect storm, calm on the surface, wildfire beneath. The board chair approached the pavilion like she owned the soil it stood on. "Well," she said, voice slicing through the garden like a blade, "I was wondering where my little traitor ran off to." The enforcer beside me went rigid. Marjorie's gaze dropped to the laptop. "Working on something?" she asked lightly, too lightly. I didn't answer. Silence was the only power she didn't know how to fight. She stepped closer, hands clasped behind her back. You really think you can outmaneuver me in my community? Your community? I said quietly. Not for long. Her eyes narrowed, that tiny flicker of fear she couldn't hide. Good. She knew. She felt the shift. Her system wasn't untouchable anymore. I shut the laptop slowly, never looking away from her. The war was no longer covert, and tomorrow her downfall would begin. Marjorie Klein didn't move at first. She just stood there at the edge of the pavilion, framed by the tomato vines and the sagging wooden posts, staring at me like she was trying to calculate how much damage I'd already done. The board chair had always ruled this neighborhood by fear, by intimidation, by surveillance, by the quiet promise that she'd ruin anyone who didn't obey her. But now she sensed something she had never felt before, a crack she couldn't patch, a threat she couldn't predict. Me. Her lips curled. You think hiding in the garden makes you untouchable? The enforcer in crimson beside me flinched as if each word carried weight. She wasn't just afraid. She knew this confrontation was the point of no return. I didn't answer Marjorie. She thrived on reactions. Instead, I closed my laptop, stood up slowly, and walked past her without a word. For the first time, someone was bold enough to turn their back on her. That alone rattled her more than anything I could have said. By the time I reached my truck, my pulse had steadied into something sharp and ready. I wasn't waiting for the tyrant in heels to strike first. She had already done enough damage, my wife's trauma, the SWAT raid, the fabricated violations. She'd weaponized power, and today I was going to dismantle it. I drove straight to the Municipal Operations Center, the one place Marjorie had zero influence. It sat on the far edge of the city, all glass panels and steel beams, humming with the controlled chaos of government infrastructure. This was where emergency routing protocols were maintained. This was where her lies would die. I parked in the visitor section. The crisp fall air hit as soon as I stepped out, grounding me. My wife had insisted on staying home. She wanted me to focus, not worry about her safety. The enforcer in crimson followed me in her own car, keeping distance, watching for retaliation from the officer of rules. Inside the center, everything smelled like printer ink and antiseptic. Screens blinked with municipal data feeds. Emergency dispatch logs scrolled across large monitors. The people here were trained, disciplined, immune to manipulation by HOA egos. Perfect. I took a seat on a shaded bench outside the glass doors, pulled out my laptop, and initiated the final synchronization protocol. The evidence packet was finished. Every altered log, every forged escalation code, every stolen access pathway. The whole digital skeleton of the system she'd built to intimidate an entire community. The clipboard queen's confession, the enforcer in crimson's warnings, my own technical breakdown of her modifications. Together, they formed a bomb she couldn't defuse. As the file synced, the enforcer approached cautiously. "You're really doing it today," she whispered. "Today," I said, "Silverwood Ridge gets its freedom back." She exhaled shakily. "She's at warpath level. The officer of rules is rallying the rest of the board. They don't know what you're about to send, but they know something big is coming." Marjorie Klein said, "He'll never see tomorrow as a homeowner." I almost laughed. She's already lost. She just doesn't know it yet. The enforcer looked at me with something between fear and admiration. "Once this goes out, she'll come after me too." "No," I said firmly. "Once this goes out, she won't be able to come after anyone." Just then, my network monitor pinged. Another intrusion attempt. This one bolder, sloppier, desperate. The tyrant in heels was losing her grip. I activated a trace blocker, rerouting her attempt into a dead node. She'd get nothing but scrambled packets and error codes. Her empire was thinning, cracking, collapsing beneath the weight of her own corruption. And then, it was time. I hit transmit. A progress bar flashed across my screen, sending to City Oversight Committee, sending to Emergency Communications Office, sending to SWAT Internal Review. When it hit 100%, something shifted in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks, the moment before a tyrant falls. The enforcer whispered, "What happens now?" I closed the laptop, stood, and faced the sunlight pouring across the lot. "Now," I said, "we step out of her shadow." And miles away, in her HOA office, Marjorie Klein's reign began to crumble. The fallout hit faster than even I expected. By late afternoon, 3 municipal departments had acknowledged receipt of my evidence packet. By evening, the Emergency Communications Office issued an internal alert requesting clarification from Silverwood Ridge HOA regarding unauthorized escalation signatures. And by the time the sun dipped behind the oak-lined streets, every board member had been summoned to an emergency meeting, which meant one thing: the tyrant in heels was cornered. I arrived at the HOA clubhouse to a parking lot packed tighter than 4th of July traffic. Neighbors spilled across the walkway, some whispering anxiously, some openly furious, all sensing that the board chair's iron grip had finally fractured. The enforcer in crimson walked beside me, hood up, hands buried in her jacket pockets. She was terrified, but she didn't run. Not tonight. Inside, the meeting hall buzzed with electricity. Anger, curiosity, and fear tangled together. Folding chairs lined the room, filled with residents who had been silent for years under the clipboard queen's petty domination. The officer of rules stood stiff near the podium, binder clutched like a riot shield. And at the front of the room, pacing like a caged wolf, was Marjorie Klein herself. As soon as she saw me, her expression sharpened into something venomous. "You," she hissed, pointing at me with manic precision. "You're behind this circus." Every eye in the room snapped toward us. I stepped forward. "Behind what, Marjorie? The truth?" A wave of murmurs rolled through the hall. The board chair's nostrils flared. "You've compromised private systems," she snapped. "Fabricated evidence, manipulated my staff." "My staff," the clipboard queen muttered under her breath, but loud enough that those closest heard her, and heads turned. Her defection had begun. I raised my voice. "I sent your emergency escalation logs to the city, the ones showing you spoofed access to a municipal channel to trigger a SWAT raid on my wife." Gasps. Someone stood. Someone else swore softly. The officer of rules shifted nervously, glancing toward the door like she wanted to flee. Marjorie slammed her palm against the podium. "Lies! Distortions! That data is proprietary to the HOA." "There it is," I said. "Your favorite shield. HOA property. HOA authority. You've used those words to terrorize this community for years. But municipal emergency systems aren't HOA property. Forging those access pathways is a state crime." The room erupted. Questions, shock, anger filling the air. The enforcer in crimson stepped forward, removing her hood. Her voice trembled, but she stood firm. "He's telling the truth. I saw the logs myself. She made me help her reroute the system." Silence slammed the room flat. Every head swiveled back to the betrayer. Marjorie's face twisted. "You ungrateful." "No." The enforcer lifted her chin. "No more threats, no more fear. You forced me to participate. You blackmailed half this board, and you used your position to punish anyone who questioned you." Now the neighbors were whispering louder, faces red with anger, others pale with betrayal. I stepped beside her. "The City Oversight Committee will audit everything. Your surveillance nodes, your override codes, your falsified violation database." A man in the audience raised his hand, not to ask a question, but to point directly at the tyrant in heels. "We trusted you," he said. "You fined my wife for having a rescue dog. You threatened to revoke my garage permit because I wouldn't vote your way." Another voice chimed in, then another, and another. The room swelled with pent-up rage. "This meeting is adjourned," Marjorie shrieked. "Everyone out." "No," I said calmly. "For the first time in years, they're not leaving." The officer of rules tried to gather her papers, but they shook so hard she dropped half of them. The clipboard queen looked ready to faint. And then, the clubhouse door opened. A city official stepped inside, badge displayed, flanked by 2 emergency communications auditors. The room froze. "Marjorie Klein," he said, voice steady. "We need to speak with you regarding your unauthorized use of state emergency infrastructure." The color drained from her face. Her empire had finally met someone it couldn't intimidate. The moment the city official spoke her name, something inside Marjorie Klein finally cracked. For all her theatrics, all her intimidation, all her obsession with power, she suddenly looked small. The board chair who once strutted through Silverwood Ridge like she owned every square inch of pavement now stood frozen, cornered by her own arrogance. The auditors stepped forward, badges gleaming beneath the fluorescent clubhouse lights. "We need to review your systems, your access logs, and your emergency communications permissions immediately." Her voice trembled for the first time. "You can't just—" "We can," the lead auditor said. "You accessed a state-protected emergency escalation pathway without authorization. That falls under jurisdiction." Neighbors stared in stunned silence. The officer of rules backed away from the podium, as if physical distance might save her career. The clipboard queen pressed a shaking hand to her chest, guilt and relief battling across her face. The enforcer in crimson stood beside me, breathing unsteadily but standing taller than I'd ever seen her. Marjorie's gaze cut to me like broken glass. "You did this," she whispered. "No," I said quietly. "You did." The auditors escorted her out of the clubhouse. The tyrant in heels stumbled once, heels scraping across the tile floor. A small sound, but one that signaled the end of her reign. Neighbors didn't jeer. They didn't cheer. They simply watched, stunned, as the woman who'd terrorized an entire community walked toward a future she could no longer control. By the time I stepped outside, dusk was settling over the cul-de-sac. Porch lights flickered on, one by one. The air felt lighter, like the entire neighborhood had been holding its breath for years and finally exhaled. My wife hurried toward me across the pavement, her steps fast and shaky. When she reached me, she wrapped her arms around my waist, burying her face against my chest. For the first time since the raid, her breathing wasn't panicked. It was relieved. "It's over?" she whispered. "It's ending," I said. "And now the city takes it from here." She nodded into my shirt, trembling with leftover fear. My brother, the SWAT commander, arrived moments later, stepping out of his cruiser with a mixture of anger and guilt etched across his face. "Had I known," he said, voice tight, "I would have never let my team through that door." "I know," I replied. "She engineered it perfectly, until she didn't." He looked toward the clubhouse where the auditors were still speaking with secondary board members. "She won't get away with this," he said. "Not one piece of it." Neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering, some wiping tears, some holding each other. The clipboard queen approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. "I turned over everything," she said. "All the files, all the memos, all the forced violations. She can't twist it anymore." "You did the right thing," I told her. She blinked rapidly. "I didn't do it for her. I did it for the families she hurt." The enforcer in crimson joined her, putting a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We'll testify if needed, both of us." My wife reached for their hands. "Thank you," she said softly. For a moment we stood in a quiet circle, those who'd been intimidated, those who'd suffered, and those who finally refused to stay silent. And it hit me then. This wasn't just my victory, it was the neighborhood's. Silverwood Ridge wasn't a playground for a power-hungry authoritarian anymore. It was a community again, one ready to rebuild trust, safety, and neighborliness without fear of a surveillance-obsessed clipboard queen micromanaging every breath. As the last traces of daylight faded, I stepped to the center of the cul-de-sac and looked back toward the homes lining the street. The street my wife had been terrified to drive on after her own sister-in-law unknowingly led a raid into it. The street Marjorie had twisted into a weapon. Finally, it felt peaceful. And to everyone listening now, if you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because sometimes the only way to fix a community is to expose the one person who was breaking it.